May the words of my mouth and the meditations of my heart be always acceptable in your sight, O Lord, my strength and my Redeemer. Amen. So if you noticed me taking a picture just then, before I send it to America's Most Wanted, I just wanted to let you know that apparently I'm the one doing the check-in this morning, and there's no way for me to do that other than to take a picture and then try to suss out who was here afterwards. And then the other thing I'm thinking why there's so many people here this morning is you must have heard about the train wreck that we had last week during the liturgy with me not having the batteries and the mic and forgetting to turn the camera on and then forgetting a couple of other things. And this being NASCAR country, I'm assuming you're here to see the wreck this week, right? I mean, so far, so good. And wasn't it great in the wake of the revival that I was talking about in the announcements beforehand? And this is that we played Wade in the Water, and had Pei do it from the piano. That is why I did that. I figured that was one good spiritual hymn that we might all know, at least the refrain, and we did. And so, yay to us, which caused me to say amen afterwards. That was wonderful. Maybe we'll do a little more of that in the days to follow, or the weeks to follow. Okay, so crowd participation here. Raise your hand if you walk everywhere you go. Anybody? There's a couple of people who raised their hands. Well, me neither. I do walk every day, and not just from the rectory to the car and from the car to my office. I walk Angus pretty much every day, and according to my devices, I average 5.3 miles a day in the last year or so. This morning, on the third Sunday of Easter, just 2 weeks since the day, it is Luke's turn to share his perspective on that first Easter day. Luke shares the experience of the two of Jesus's disciples who happened to be going from Jerusalem to Emmaus, walking from Jerusalem to Emmaus that day. It is 7 miles from Jerusalem to Emmaus. They walked everywhere. It's how they got around. And what do people do when they walk in the age before cell phones and iPods and Walkmans and all of those things? You talked with one another, and they had a lot to talk about, didn't they? And as they were walking along, this guy they don't think they know fell in with them. As they walked along this 7 miles, they were talking. They were surprised, maybe even shocked, to learn that this guy didn't seem to know what had happened. One of them said something like, "Hey, new guy." That's what we would say, right, Mark? "Hey, new guy. Are you the only stranger in Jerusalem who does not know the things that have taken place in these days?" Somehow those two guys got all those 7 miles to Emmaus without realizing that it was Jesus. Does that make anybody wonder? How? I mean, guys are notoriously unobservant, right? I mean, all you have to do is watch some of the funny reels out there to notice that that's the case. Or any husband out there who has ever had their wife say, "Aren't you going to say anything about my new hairstyle?" Should we show a raise of hands for that one? I don't think so. They got all that way, 7 miles, hours of walking, and they didn't realize that Jesus was with them. And then they got there, and because it was late, They invited Jesus, they urged Jesus to stay with them. And so he agreed. They still don't have a clue somehow. Finally, when they were eating together, when Jesus blessed and broke the bread, the quote is, their eyes were opened and they recognized him. And then as soon as they recognized him, the text says that he vanished from their sight. Wait, what? Has anybody here ever had, okay, stone cold sober, has anybody ever had somebody who was right in front of them just vanish? Perfect. It never dawned on me when I put that line in there that Wayne, our world famous Danville-based magician, would raise his hand. Oh, that's perfect. Thank you. Thank you for, oh, that's awesome. That is awesome. Okay, so one person. Maybe if I had really been thinking, we would have had would have had Wayne come and do a demonstration right about now, or at least at coffee hour. Oh, Lord, that's good. Woo, okay. As I was saying, how does someone just vanish? Wait, you can tell that story at coffee hour. These two had to have been thinking, what just happened? Again, at coffee hour. How did we spend the whole day walking with this guy and not realize that it was Jesus? And then when we did, he vanishes. I wonder if two of us were walking along from my house, from the rectory to the bridge down the bike path. So, okay, so you have to go out. I'm going to tell you how to do this. You go out of Forest Hills to Main Street. You go down Main Street to Ballou Park. You go through Ballou Park, down the back, across the street on Memorial by the water plant, up to the bridge, hang a right. And then you just keep hanging rights and you're on the bike trail. So from the rectory to the bridge, the 29 bypass just past Dan Daniel, that is 7 miles. You can ask me at coffee hour how I know that, but I'm telling you, it's 7 miles. On my bike, on a good day, it takes me 30 minutes. So think about that. So if we're walking along, let's say we decide to do that route, but walk it. And I asked you if you believed this story, this gospel lesson this morning. I wonder what you'd say. And remember, in this story, we are Episcopalians, right? So we'd be okay with the possibility that things in the Bible might not be literally true. There's metaphor. And Jesus used metaphor all the time. So why would we think literally? What would you say? And you might say to me, and you should, what would you say? Well, here's one thing. I mean, I'm a preacher, right? So I'm going to whip out a quote, especially right now. I'd share this quote. It's from a book, The Magnificent Defeat, by the Reverend Frederick Buechner. I could ask for a show of hands here. Does anybody know Buechner? 1, 2. Oh, this is perfect. You all need to know about Buechner. For those who don't, though, Frederick Buechner was a fairly well-known Christian writer who died last year at the ripe old age of 96. Over a 60-year span, he wrote 39 books. He went to Union Seminary in New York City, kind of at the pinnacle of that seminary's stature in the Christian world in the 20th century. And if I had written them down, I would tell you some of the people that he studied under, but they were the giants of theology at the time. He was ordained a Presbyterian minister. He never served in a parish or congregation. His ministry was writing. So I'd highly recommend him to all of you. Here is the quote from The Magnificent Defeat. Quote, "If we are to believe he is really alive with all that implies, then we have to believe without proof. And of course, that is the only way it could be. If it could be somehow proved, then we would have no choice but to believe. We would lose our freedom not to believe. And in the very moment that we lost that freedom, we would cease to be human beings. Our love of God would have been forced upon us. And love that is forced is, of course, not love at all. Love must be freely given. Love must live in the freedom not to love. It must take risks. Love must be prepared to suffer, even as Jesus on the cross suffered. And part of that suffering is doubt." Close quote. So this, what I'm about to say, may seem very un-Episcopalian to some of you. So do we believe that Jesus Christ was raised from the dead after he was crucified on the cross, or do we not? Or do we sort of believe it, want to believe it, but would really like proof? Or have we stopped thinking about it at all, wondering about it at all, puzzling about it at all? I hope for most of us, it's the second one, which implies that we want to believe, but we wonder about how it might have happened, how it could be. If that's the case, which I suspect it is for most of us, as I said, then Buechner's words, I think, can be a great comfort to us. As I've said many times before, and may have said as recently as last Sunday from this very spot, from this pulpit, the way that we know that Christ lives is by seeing the Christ. It's experiencing the Christ, sensing Christ's presence in our encounters with others, in our days as they go by, in our lives. Just like those two disciples, we may need to travel a few miles, so to speak, with someone before it hits us, before it dawns on us that the holy is present in this person. Other times we may see it right off the bat. Maybe you've had that experience. There is a story I tell that was told to me. Maybe you've heard me tell it before. Two Jesuit priests, this is supposedly a true story that I was told. Two Jesuit priests, this is in Dallas at a Jesuit high school that has Jesuit priests and brothers who live there and teach. They have a residence there. Two of them are reading the newspaper in their quarters, and the doorbell rings. One of them gets up and goes to the door and is gone for several minutes. When he comes back, his brother priest asks him who it was at the door. And he replied, Jesus, in his least recognizable form. Now, two Jesuit priests who teach high school, who say Jesus in his least recognizable form, who might that be? One of the troublemaker seniors? A parent who has a gripe? A homeless person looking for some food? Could be any or all of those people, right? The response is the telling part. From his perspective, Jesus in his least recognizable form. Aren't we all like that at times? When we reflect on our day and realize that an encounter that we had with another person, we weren't necessarily our best selves. And of course, we have had those experiences of other people too. Jesus in his least recognizable form, and yet still Jesus, right? Jesus, the Christ, is alive. And that life is alive in everyone and everything. That last bit, as Franciscan friar Richard Rohr, Father Richard Rohr would add, everyone and everything. As Christians, we are charged, we are expected, we are invited to seek and serve the Christ in all persons, loving our neighbor as ourselves. I hope you will recognize that line as coming from the baptismal covenant, which we recited just this past Easter morning. This morning, I would like to move away from that word that connotes expectation as if it were an assignment that we might prefer to skip sometimes, and focus on the nature of invitation, of gift. It is an invitation to receive the gift, to be blessed with the gift of the experience of the holy in another person. A blessing. It is a blessing. Now, I am going to ask for a show of hands, and I hope all of you will raise your hands. And if you think you shouldn't raise your hand, raise it anyway. We have all been in the presence. Raise your hand, come on. Raise your hand. We have all been in the presence of someone in which the Spirit of the Holy is palpable. I guarantee you, I can't prove that, but I guarantee you that it's happened. And if you don't think it has, it's because you are like one of those two disciples on the road to Emmaus who, for whatever reason, couldn't see it. So maybe in these last days, if a certain 84-year-old man in Kansas City had approached things differently, he would have experienced a brief and blessed encounter with a young man who just happened to be at the wrong address, but was full of the presence of the Christ, of the Holy, in those unique ways that only teenagers can have, right? Maddening, frustrating, all of those things, which I'm not sure is the experience he had, but nonetheless, if we have had teenage children or have been around them, we know that they have their beautiful moments in the midst of being a real pain in the ass. I can't prove it, but my guess is that was meant to be a holy encounter. That could have been the opportunity for a lonely old man to have a brief and yet positive encounter with a kid who was just lost. Actually, he wasn't lost. He was just at the wrong address. I happen to know Kansas City a little bit, and they have these numbered streets, which seems kind of like, a cop out to just number the streets. But they have these streets, 100th Street, but then they have terraces and other things, and it's really easy to get those confused, especially before phones that tell you where to go and talk to you. That was an opportunity to have a holy encounter. And just like those two disciples, he missed it. He missed it. We need to think long and hard about who we are in the world. I am afraid that we are not any longer the shining city on the hill that we have claimed to be. We have tarnished our own image. We are fearful of so many things. Empires rise and fall. Rome rose and fell. England rose and fell. Sorry, Katie. And anybody else who's a real Anglophile. Human history tells us that that is what happens. Now, I'd like to think that we can manage to change history. And we might. I think if anybody can do it, we can do it. To quote one other person, Winston Churchill, the United States will do the right thing in the end after trying all the other options. So we're in the midst of that phase, trying all of the other options. But it requires all of us to be citizens of God first, and then citizens of other kinds after that. We are, as baptized people, expected to look for, to seek and serve the Christ that is in all people. My God, that's hard some days. It's going to be easy for me today because we have a investor meeting. Okay. I thought maybe you'd laugh like guffaw at that. So as we move forward in this blessed 50 days of Easter, when we celebrate that which seemed to be tragic, may we all seek in the best possible sense, not as an assignment, but as an invitation to open a gift, the gift of the holy that is present in all people. And as for that vanishing thing, see Wayne at the coffee hour. He will tell all the secrets. Amen.